Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Strauss. I am a staff writer and senior political correspondent for the New Republic. I'm here with my partner in crime, Grace Segers. And today, for another edition of our Run Up Live newsletter events, we have Congressman Auchincloss, and I messed up that name. I'm sorry, Congressman. The Massachusetts Congressman, rising star within the party. We are excited about this, especially after the midterm elections where the results were not what we expected. So I'm very excited to talk with the congressman about the events that happened over the past few days, what the outlook for the House is, and the political landscape both in Massachusetts and in general.
Yeah, thank you so much for being with us, Congressman. Daniel, do you want to get started with questions, or shall I start?
Yeah, I mean, look, Congressman, can we just start right now and dive right into the midterm election results? I mean, right now it's looking like it's sort of unclear what will happen in the House, which is, I think, the biggest surprise of this election. In the Senate, Democrats are retaining control. Uh, I am curious what you think that means for the Georgia runoffs. But beyond that, what your takeaways were for a pretty surprising midterm.
Good afternoon. First of all, Daniel, Grace, thank you for having me on. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. And it's good to be back in Washington. It's been 6 weeks almost, and ready to get back to the work of DC here. Biggest takeaway from the midterms: voters rejected extremism. When voters go to the polls and they get a choice, they'll vote against extremism. And Democrats did a terrific job this cycle of putting forward strong candidates authentic to their district, who could distance themselves from some of the Democratic Party's brand problems in swing districts, who could talk about lower costs in specific terms that had legislative accomplishments to back them up, and who could draw sharp, compelling contrast with GOP extremism, in particular on abortion and democracy. It's a winning formula, and we're going to double down on it for 24.
I also want to ask specifically, and forgive me for looking at my notes here, but you're from Massachusetts, and one of the things that pundits, analysts were really expecting or were warning of was a potential red wave sweeping through New England. So we saw folks thinking that Alan Fung's chances in Rhode Island were pretty high. Congressman Chris Pappas in New Hampshire was in danger. So why didn't this New England red wave materialize in your view?
You're right that pundits were saying that New England was going to get shellacked. And I did about $500,000 written or raised to help Democrats across the country. But I started really with a focus on New England for exactly that reason. I was worried about the Rhode Island second, about the Maine second, about both seats in New Hampshire. And so we did a lot of work to help those candidates. And in particular, my friend and roommate, Jared Golden, in the Maine second, I was really invested in that race, both on the ground and through fundraising efforts. Why didn't we lose those New England seats? Well, first and foremost, we just had terrific candidates. I mean, people who know Annie Custer and Chris Pappas, for example, people who know Jared Golden, know that they are exactly what I just described. They are people who are of their district. You know, I was up in the Maine second 1 weekend before the election, talking to the mayor of Lewiston, who's known Jared for years, who was telling me that up and down Main Street in Lewiston, those business owners know who Jared Golden is. They don't believe the millions of dollars of attack ads against him because they literally know who he is, and they've seen him demonstrate independent thought and conviction for the Maine second. One of the canvassers came back and said that she had talked to his middle school teacher who wished him the best. When you put candidates like that in the field, they withstand some of the liabilities of the Democratic Party brand in these frontline seats, and they withstand the negative attack ads. And he was able to focus on lower costs, and he was able to draw pretty sharp contrast with Bruce Poliquin on issues like democracy and abortion that I think did register with voters, including conservative voters. And we just saw that across New England.
Can I just jump in there? The Golden example is actually really interesting, right? Because he's a member of Congress who often bucks his party. So, I mean, just abstractly, in a year like this, where a lot of the fundamentals were not favorable to Democrats, I think I could see him surviving at the same time. This is a moderate to conservative congressman who has criticized the Biden administration on taxes on fiscal policy. But like, he was with the herd.
It's an exemplar of Biden's big tent approach to politics and policy, that Jared Golden in the Maine second, me in the Massachusetts fourth, a more liberal district, although a district that has both red and blue parts, and then some of our colleagues in deep blue seats, all of them could go back to their districts and talk about things they had done that would register with their voters, right? Jared Golden can talk about Medicare negotiation of drug prices, even if he's not accentuating some of the other stuff that he had to distance himself from. That is a testament to this president's approach to making policy, is that everybody got to go back to their districts and talk about concrete wins for their constituents.
And sorry, just looking at my notes again here. So yeah, for the most part, Democrats did do a lot better than expected in the House.
Yes.
But then you also have issues in New York and particularly Florida. So there did seem to be like there was some Republican strength, a little bit of a red wave, but more in those two states, some other pockets in the country. So what's your theory on why Democrats just didn't do as well in those states?
Yeah, so I mean, the first takeaway of these midterms is success, and we should double down on success, right? On average, since the Great Depression, the president's party has lost 28 seats in the House. We don't have final tabulation, but we know it's going to be single digits at most. Yeah. So this is a win. This is a win, and finger pointing, blame game really just doesn't have a place here, because we should be looking at 24 and saying, how do we, tweak this formula for success? Having said that, there are tweaks we need to make. There are things we got to do. Since about the 1960s, at least, Republicans have been successfully casting Democrats as disrespectful and disruptive of social order on issues of immigration, crime, et cetera. And that's effective. It's effective because you can't feel afraid and curious at the same time. I don't mean that like philosophically, I mean that neurologically. You literally can't process those two emotions at the same time. And so if you make voters afraid of crime, afraid of disruptions to their way of life, they're not going to be curious about what Democrats have to offer on terms of economic policies, which we know consistently pull above our opponents. And we have to neutralize that liability. We cannot allow crime to weigh down the ticket in 24. We need to address that issue head on and put voters' fears to rest by demonstrating respect for public safety. I think the vast majority of the party did a terrific job of that this cycle. Double down and make adjustments where necessary, so it's even less of an issue in 24.
But what can Congress do specifically about issues of crime, which, like you say, that's a very potent attack, but it's not necessarily the bailiwick of Congress. So what can you do to then point to voters and be like, hey, this is what we did specifically on this issue that will make a difference in your day-to-day life?
There's a couple different elements there. One, it's rhetoric does matter there. Voters, you cannot condescend to voters on issues of public safety or about how they see things around them. And so it does matter, the rhetoric around crime. We have to say property violent crime is unacceptable and that it needs to be addressed, and we need strong policies in place to do that. As you said, some of the policies are at the state house level, and Democrats should be, where necessary, amending those policies at the state house level. But there are some policies at the federal level. And here, actually, we've got a pretty good record in the 117th. I voted to fund the police in the 117th Congress. It was Republicans who voted to defund them with the Capitol police votes we took in 2021. I voted for common sense gun safety legislation that would take assault weapons out of the hands of dangerous individuals. And Republicans voted against that. At the federal level, we have a good record on crime legislation. We have got to make sure that that is what comes through, and not countervailing policies or countervailing rhetoric from other elements of the Democratic ecosystem.
Congressman, in perfect Democratic fashion, you laid out a pretty convincing point that you cannot put on a bumper sticker. So on crime, like let's be honest here, like this is like you can't fit that on there. That was like 300 words. On crime, like the interesting thing is that Val Demings in Florida did not win, and she has. I mean, she looks like the kind of candidate you would want Democrats would want to prop up on to focus on crime. Now, there were other fundamentals in that race, but what in this next election cycle, what is that candidate going to look like?
Well, to
What
be
is it going to be a police officer or I don't know, an ex-FBI agent, or is there going to be a slogan? What would be the most effective way to address it in the future?
Yeah, to be clear, I'm not necessarily saying that crime is the message. I'm saying you've got to neutralize the Republicans' attacks on Democrats as being disrespectful or disruptive of social order. That's different. You neutralize that message. You have to start the conversation by neutralizing that. And then the pitch for Democrats is going to be lower costs for working families. And that's how we win in 24: housing, childcare, healthcare, higher education, lowering costs for families. Because there we've got a powerful issue, and we've got powerful plans that we can really sharply contrast with, the Rick Scott agenda. I hope that guy is in charge of the Republicans' plans in 24, because he just laid out a series of disastrous policies that really are not in step with how Americans view their economic security.
So, I mean, look, well, first off, can we just get you on the record here? Were you surprised with the election results or not?
No, in fact, I was on the record the night before the election results saying that I felt like we were going to outperform pundits' expectations. And I also think it's important to emphasize here that the polls were pretty accurate. In fact, pollsters probably had a better night than any time since before 2016. The polls consistently showed this was going to be a close election, consistently. And it was a close election in a lot of seats.
I ran into Congressman Ruben Gallego this morning because he walks the dog where I walk my dog. And, he did say that, look, like the polls were right. There were a lot of like right-leaning pollsters that sort of muddled a lot of that. But at the same time, like I was surprised because if you looked at the policy issues that seemed to resonate most with voters, abortion, protecting democracy was not at the top of the list. It was usually some sort of economic issue. I guess I continue to be surprised at like what happened in the end. And so I wanted to go back to an earlier point you made. Was it candidate quality? Was it just that the polls did not pick up how concerned Americans were with democracy, or something else?
Voters don't like extremism. And it's abortion. Yes, it's democracy. I know you're saying that those didn't register the highest.
Abortion really, highest, not at all. Right.
Abortion really does. I'll say abortion really did register quite high, especially with independent voters. But it's more that there's a narrative, right? You got to be able to tell a story, and the GOP really put itself in a position where it's telling a story of extremism to American voters. Voters don't like extremism. Every time we let voters weigh in on it, they will tell us that they want their politics between the 35-yard lines. And we saw a sharp repudiation of the GOP policies. I think what was interesting about Dobbs is a big reason why presidents tend to lose seats when they're in power is that voters have a status quo bias for divided government, and they like to create tailwinds for the party in opposition. It was almost like Democrats could run to a certain extent as the party that could restore some sanity to government, almost like it's the opposition party, because Dobbs created such a threat to the conception of normalcy in American politics over the last 50 years. I think it was a very powerful element of it. It's not, you can't pick that up just on a single poll. It's really the broader story of the GOP just getting itself out of the mainstream.
I want to move away from the election just for a little bit and talk about what is coming down the pike. So the election is over. We're still not quite sure if who's controlling the House, but we probably will soon. and you have like a month and a half to get a lot of stuff done. This is a jam-packed lame duck session. So what do you think are the biggest priorities that Congress should be addressing now?
Budget, got to pass a budget. Defense bill is going to have to come to the floor for a vote. Marriage equality, I think, is important to codify that. I'd like to think we have the votes for it. And Electoral Count Act reform. ECA is critical. We've got to prevent a repeat of January 6th.
Right.
Man, so, you'd like to say you have the counts on a marriage. So you're not sure?
I can't speak for the Senate. I mean, in the House we do, but I can't speak for the Senate.
Okay.
So on the budget specifically, government funding is going to run out on December 16th. Are you hoping that there's going to be an omnibus package that you can vote on? Or are you concerned at all that you're just going to end up kicking the can down the road with continuing resolution, and then a potentially Republican House could throw a wrench in the works here?
It's always better to pass a real budget. It's government agencies do better in their capital planning and their operating expenses if they have a real budget to work off of, and it's a core Article 1 responsibility of Congress. So yeah, we should pass a real budget. Having said that, there's going to be such a whirlpool on the GOP side of the House in particular that I can't speak to what is definitely going to happen. But yeah, we should pass a real budget.
I cannot imagine living in an era where we're not talking about the debt ceiling every single week or something. Like, it's just a part of like Politico huddle and punch bowl. The debt ceiling will run out and blah, 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 you know?
Yeah, and I'm keen to hear from the administration about what they think is a responsible path forward on this. I'd like to hear from Treasury and the Biden administration on how they want to manage the debt ceiling. I think that really needs to be an area where Congress and the executive branch are in close concert here. It's clear that Kevin McCarthy does not have the leadership capacity, if he were to become speaker, to take this issue on. So we're going to have. I'm
surprised you're not like smiling more at that "if he were to become speaker" thing, because it is a question at this point. If he's going to become speaker, what is the caucus to you? I mean, is there a possibility that you will be able to bring over, or there will be crossover votes among this Republican caucus?
Yeah, I'm not smiling because the GOP's problems and antics stopped being funny a long time ago, because it's bad for the country. We need two serious parties who are putting forward ideas, who believe in democracy, who uphold the Constitution. And, in short-term political cycles, can it be helpful if they're in disarray? Sure. But like, ultimately, as an American, as a member of Congress, like I want this place to work better. And right now, the GOP is not putting itself forward as a serious partner in governance.
Well, speaking of serious partner, and going back to the debt limit there, Republicans have said that they are willing to leverage the debt limit to extract social spending cuts. So perhaps cuts to Medicare, Social Security. We could be ending up with the same kind of situation that we had during the Obama administration, when there was a very big fight over the debt limit. And are you concerned at all that if this doesn't get addressed in the lame duck, that then we could be tumbling down this rabbit hole all over again and potentially risk default and plunging the global economy into recession?
Well, a lot of things to unpack there. First, I'm not accepting your premise that it's going to be a Speaker McCarthy next term. I mean, we're still counting votes. Democrats still have a path to 218, and it could be that we've got both the House, Senate, and the presidency in the next term and can manage things responsibly. I also think I dispute a little bit the analogy to under President Obama, because there the House Speaker tentatively, tenuously had some control and some credibility to negotiate on behalf of his conference. And that is yet to be demonstrated. Like, I don't think forget about like the scale and tenor of negotiations. I'm not sure we've got a serious negotiating partner.
Well, is this still something that you would like to see addressed in the lame duck? Because I mean, it is looking like Republicans are going to gain control of the House. You're right, there's still a path, but it is
Yeah, we're
an
still counting.
increasingly narrow path.
We're still counting. It's too early for me to weigh in on that. I do want to hear from the administration. This has got to be something that that Treasury Secretary Yellen and the president himself have gotten a chance to weigh in on. We've got to be able to figure out what makes sense, because I really want to, especially in my role on Financial Services Committee, I really want to hear from Treasury about what they're actually looking at in FY 2023.
So, Congressman, since you opened the Pandora's box of like not a possible Speaker McCarthy, let's talk about Democratic leadership and elections. You know, if there weren't, can you talk a little bit just about the rumblings among Democratic leadership? It looks like there's going to be a divided DCCC race. One day, Leader Pelosi will not be leader anymore. It looks like Hakeem Jeffries is the heavy favorite, but are there surprises you expect? It does feel like, more so than usual, there is sort of rumbling in the ground is shifting a bit more under Democrats for some kind of shift in party leadership.
Speaker Pelosi is Speaker of the House, and she'll make her decisions about what she wants to do with her future in her own time. And I think there's widespread belief that she deserves the space and time to make her own decision. And, you know, when that moment comes that our existing leadership wants to transition, I do think that there is strong support across the caucus for generational change.
Is there someone you'd like to see lead the DCCC?
We haven't even finished counting the votes for the 22 cycle, so I'm not weighing in on the 24 cycle yet. I want to see somebody who's going to double down on what we did well here, and someone who also understands the tweaks we want to make to neutralize some of the most potent attacks from the right.
Well, Sean Patrick Maloney is from this cycle, and there's been a lot of criticism within the party about his leadership, and even some complaints that maybe a slightly different tact could have led to a few more Democratic seats in the House. Do you agree with that? Do you think everything went well this cycle?
I think the numbers speak for themselves. As I said, since the Great Depression, average of 28 seats lost, we are going to hugely outperform that historical trend. So Sean Patrick Maloney has just the numbers behind him right now. He did a good job.
Okay.
I want to go back to something you just said about generational change. Clearly, you are part of a younger cohort in Congress. This is not entirely a septuagenarian and octogenarian caucus here in the Democratic Party. So I want you to kind of expand on what you mean by generational change. Do you think that having all of these 70 and 80 somethings at the top of the party, so not just in the House, but also in the Senate, also in the presidency, do you think that in general, younger voters, younger Americans are tired of seeing politicians who aren't of their generation?
I do think that there is hunger for generational change. By the way, not just in politics, media, entertainment, business. We're seeing a lot of millennials who want to step up. That's just totally natural. I mean, when you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, you're hungry to take the reins and demonstrate what you can do. That happened in previous generations. It'll happen in future ones as well. I look at people based on their record and what they're delivering. President Biden has had a tremendously successful first 2 years in office. U.S. economy has grown faster than China's for the first time in my lifetime. We reopened the economy. We got kids back to school, got Americans back to work, generational investments in infrastructure, science, manufacturing, biggest, boldest climate action and clean energy commitment in history in 2 years, while the GOP was, lobbying attacks on women's rights and our very democracy. That was done in partnership with Speaker Pelosi. So they're delivering results, and they're both going to Cooperstown because of it for these 2 years. Is there hunger for the next generation to step up? Yes. But right now, Democrats need to be unified. We had a good night on Tuesday. Let's figure out how we're going to have an even better night 2 years from now.
Man, I just can't. I feel like if I were to ask every Democrat in the caucus, if they were surprised, they would all tell me they were not surprised. They knew this would happen. And I don't believe that. Show me the polling. Show me the secret text that you guys had being like, we're going to show these reporters. I guess that's the question.
So a few things. So one, I'm going to show you the receipts. I'm going to show you the post the night before
election
that shows me saying we're going to hugely outperform the pundits. So I will show you the receipts. Fair question. But second, like I said, the pollsters were accurate. Actually, on the generic ballot, Democrats were surprisingly strong against Republicans. That I agree that faded a little bit in the last 6 weeks, but it remained above expectations, which demonstrated that there was real misgivings about the Republican brand, even in swing districts. And then you just had bad candidates. On the Republican side, you just had bad candidates who were feeding into this narrative of extremism that we could effectively do some jujitsu on and turn it against them. So was I nervous? Yeah, of course I was nervous. And everyone gets nervous on election night. But I did think that this red wave was not going to crash over us.
I got to think that if in a different universe, a President Sununu, a President Baker would have helped usher in a different class of candidates. And maybe this, I mean, just honestly, because there's a lot of discussion among Republicans on whether Trump's endorsed candidates hurt them dramatically, whether a more disciplined, less angry party leader would have ushered a different result.
Yeah, that's the GOP's problem, not mine. I'm not going to fix them for them. Like, they can need to fix themselves. When they fix themselves and they want to come back to the adults table, let's have a debate. But until that, we are going to be a battle-hardened, extremely assertive party at the ballot boxes about what we believe in, what we think is under threat, and how we're going to draw those contrasts. That's our job, to make clear the stakes, and they're high.
Man, you just pulled out a fishing knife and gutted them like a, I don't know what kind of fish are in your
gutted
district,
them like a fish.
One of those, yes.
So, as you said, the votes are still being counted. The election isn't over, blah, blah, blah. But let's talk about 2024, because—
Are you running for president, Congressman?
I've got an amazing job, and I am excited to do it in 118th.
That's not a no. Sorry.
Well, the former president is certainly talking about running in 2024. We are expecting a Trump announcement as early as tomorrow. You've just done this whole spiel about how that's the GOP's problem, but is it good for Democrats to have Trump announcing so early and making himself kind of center of attention at this point, or is he just going to suck up all of the airspace again?
I think that depends more on you guys than us. I really think the media needs to cover him extremely differently than it did in 16 or even 20 for that matter. He lies. He's a liar. Everything he says is a lie. And we just have to start being so much crisper and clearer in the coverage of him about his lies, and also not afford him this endless stream of oxygen that inflates his salience in American public discourse. The thing he fears most is being ignored. And I really just think we need to deliver that greatest fear to him.
But going back to the earlier part of my question, do you think that this is good for Democrats to have an extremist at the top of the ticket? You just said that Americans don't like extremists. So is this going to help you guys out?
I don't want to play dice with our democracy. I want candidates of all parties at all levels of government who believe in democracy, who want to have good faith debates about how we move this country forward. I am never going to be rooting for a major party nominee to be someone of Donald Trump's character. It's too much of a risk, because as we saw in 2016, they can win.
Well, yeah, I mean, and since then, he hasn't actually won very much.
No, I think he told people that they were going to get tired of winning. And since then, I think they've gotten pretty tired of losing. 18, 20, 22. It's clear that his brand, while it clearly has a hold on 40 to 60% of the GOP primary electorate is deeply unpopular with the broader American body politic, historically unpopular.
Do you mind if we go to, do you guys mind if we go to questions right now? There's one that in particular that I really love and want to ask. It's from Jim Reeser. I'm probably mispronouncing his name. His question is, my big long-term question is the lack of viable state organizations by Democrats. I am from Ohio. I do not think Ohio's voters are all that red, but with a lack of state organization, we cannot get a winning message to voters. How can DNC enhance state organizations? Maybe even better, do they want this, or is the DNC just satisfied with having K Street money? Well, the premise at the end is a little aggressive. But can we also start with a focus on Massachusetts? Because it does feel like Republicans constantly have an advantage on these state elections, state legislatures, and that's given some difficulty in your home state for Democrats.
I love that question. I think it's a critical question. Don't quote me on these numbers, but since Obama was elected the first time, Democrats lost something like 1,000 state house seats throughout the country. We vacated our governing presence at the state level, which, as you two know, is where most domestic policy happens, is at the state level. We saw that in COVID. We see that in a lot of economic issues, and a lot of issues that are most salient to voters: housing, childcare, and higher education in particular. So we need to be incredibly serious about state houses. I see 2022 as actually an inflection point, though, as we start to refocus on it. A couple things. First, everybody who was running in a swing state as an election denier for a top election official position lost. And that was because Democrats invested in beating them. Unfortunately, we were probably going to have to keep on doing that. But that shows that there was real organization there. Number two, we won state houses. Minnesota, Michigan, I believe. Yeah, we won state houses back. That's a sign of progress in organization. We're seeing advocacy groups that are seriously organized now. The States Project is doing great work on the ground to take back these state houses. I'm excited about it. And I agree with the premise that we Democrats in the last 15 years have not done enough. I just think we're at an inflection point now where we are going to be back on the ground organizing and fundraising for these seats.
Does there need to be like a restructuring, do you think, of organizations? It's just that like the NRSLC, I'm going to get that wrong.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
They cover both Secretary of State's races and state legislative races. The DLCC, the Democratic equivalent, does not do that. And there is its own state Secretary of State race. And I think the RNC also spends a lot more time focusing on state legislatures. There is this larger, I think, constellation of Democratic groups that are focused on these. Six is another organization that comes to mind, but there's not one clearinghouse. Does that need to happen? Does there need to be like one big conference for this?
I'm receptive to that idea. Here I'd be getting over my skis. I don't want to claim that I know the mechanics of the DSLC intimately or how they work with these other groups. It'd certainly be a good question to, for us in Congress to be raising with the DNC and others about how can we double down on this success that we saw in 22. In terms of state level reforms, and this is actually really nonpartisan, but I think a critically important way that we can improve the health of our political system is with top two primaries. And I've been a supporter of those for a long time now. Yeah, I believe we saw Nevada actually just agree on this in a ballot question this cycle. California obviously does it. Washington does it. There's a couple of states that have demonstrated pretty compelling voting systems that I'd like to see more widely adopted. You have New Jersey's independent redistricting system, which is pretty good. You've got Alaska and Maine's instant runoff voting, which are both very good. You got California's top two system. I think if states adopted all three of those, you would start to see a healthier brand of politics in a lot of places.
So you're a fan of ranked choice voting then?
I am. I don't think it's a panacea. I actually think top two is more powerful. But yes, I was a supporter of the Massachusetts ranked choice voting initiative last cycle.
I do want to ask you a specific to Massachusetts and New England question. Sure. Something that's so interesting to me about New England and Massachusetts is that you guys really love your moderate Republicans. You can have these very liberal progressive members of Congress and at the same time have these moderate Republicans as governor who are extremely popular. So Sununu, Scott, Charlie Baker was popular. So pretty much like, what's up with that? Why does New England do that?
Bay State voters have always had a disposition towards divided government. They like the idea of the governor and the state house being of opposing parties. They like the idea of a governor and state house being checks on each other. And they also tend to expect slightly different things from governors than from legislators, both at the state and the federal level. I've seen that in just my own experience on the ground in Massachusetts. And unfortunately, the Mass GOP has ceased to be a viable entity. They nominated Jeff Deal, who was a complete joke of a candidate. And in the long run, I don't think that serves the state well. I think we're better when we've got real competition and people really putting forward ideas that have to compete for the average Bay State voters' vote. So you're right that Bay Staters have that preference. I don't know that the Massachusetts GOP in its current form has gotten that memo, though.
It doesn't feel that way. Like all of the New England governors mentioned here, plus one who moved to Utah, are constantly battling with their party, right? They're not the knee-jerk sort of example that I think grassroots voters look to. They are sort of the exception that proves the rule. And Trump doesn't like Mitt Romney. I guess I'm wondering though, like, to an extent, you're a Democrat, what's the point of asking this, but I still want to, at any level, is the fever going to lift, or should we even stop calling it a fever at this point?
Yeah, I just can't fix the GOP for the GOP. The GOP has to fix itself. And my focus is going to be to help Democrats in 24 make clear what the contrasts and the stakes are, because that's our job, is to provide voters with a real choice when they want to reject extremism.
Going back to you, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that in your first term, you did not join any caucuses. Is that correct?
You mean
so like
ideological
progressive?
caucuses?
Yeah, progressive caucus, New Dems, Blue Dogs, etc.
Yeah.
So are you planning on joining any of those ideological caucuses in the upcoming Congress? I'm
open to it, not committed to it. I'm interested on an issue by issue way to build bridges. I've worked with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to authorize the EPA to mandate generation shifting from fossil fuels to clean energy, working with the left there. I've worked with Stephanie Murphy to advocate trade reform to lower costs for working families. And I like being a bridge builder, and I'll continue to work with everybody in the party in good faith on issues where we have alignment. And that's really the district that I have too. I think people assume that Massachusetts is sort of uniformly blue. I got some of the bluest zip codes in the entire country. That's true in the suburbs of Boston. I have also got the reddest county in Massachusetts, in Bristol County. And I've been able to work on issues that resonate with both ends, right? I've worked closely with the mayor of Taunton, who's a MAGA Republican, on infrastructure issues with the bipartisan infrastructure law, demonstrates Joe Biden's Big Tent approach. I've also focused on clean energy and climate change and protecting democracy, issues that are deeply resonant with my more liberal suburbs in the north. So it's what my district expects, and it's what I'm trying to do within the caucus.
But it looks so fun to be part of one of these ideological caucuses. Yay!
Yeah, you go on retreats.
You go on retreats. You
have a party. I don't actually know if you have parties. I assume you have parties.
I have two little kids at home. Teddy's 2.5, Grace is 1. My wife's tolerance for retreats or parties is like 0. I vote, I do my work, and then I get my butt back home and help with the kids.
How much sleep are you getting these days, Congressman?
Grace is a good sleeper now, so we're doing better. I'm gonna knock on wood right here, but that part is going well. One thing that Joe Kennedy told me, Joe Kennedy, my predecessor, when I took office, because he had little kids too, is he was like, your wife is going to realize really quickly that when you go to Washington, it's actually sort of an escape from the rigors of childcare. And so when you come back, you're going to have to double down because she's going to expect it. And he was 100% right. When I'm back at home, Michelle has high standards for how much I'm taking off her plate.
By the way, do you expect to see former Congressman Kennedy run for some kind of office again?
That's a good question for Joe Kennedy.
Ugh, you're no fun.
When I was I went to college at Tufts, which is in the Boston area, and Joe Kennedy was in office at that time. And the nickname for him among the college Democrats was JK Trey. Does anyone actually ever call him that?
Man, the youth are terrible.
I have not heard that. No, I call him Joe.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's fair. That was not an actual question. That just brought me back to the days way back when. I'm saying that mostly to dig at Daniel, who often makes fun of me for my age. So
I'm the oldest one on this call, I realize. The congressman is 34, I'm 35.
Yeah, but now there are going to be a 25-year-old in Congress. Yeah. Do you feel like you're really aging, Congressman?
I remain the youngest parent in the Democratic caucus.
Wow.
And take that perspective with me. I am really passionate about issues that affect kids and their mental health, which, as we all know, has not been great, frankly, before the pandemic, but especially since, about their education, which took a hit with the school closures. And reopening the schools was my day one issue when I took office 2 years ago, because I saw the detrimental socio-emotional and academic effects it was having on kids. So I really do try to bring that issue to bear in everything we're talking about. Policies for kids are really, it spreads across almost everything we talk about.
In the chat here, we have a point raised by Donald Burgess that some polling showed that Gen Z was going to be pretty important in the midterm elections, which did turn out to be the case. So what role do you think that young voters have, especially going forward? And how do lawmakers keep promises to young voters? Because a lot of the young voters that I've spoken to are just absolutely sick of politicians who they feel like are leaving crises to fall on their shoulders. So how do you appeal, and what role will these young voters play?
Couple things. I think the data it's too early to say whether youth turnout materialized or not. I read an interview with David Shore in New York Magazine this morning, and he was casting some doubt about whether there really was a surge of youth turnout. We just don't know yet. It kind of is irrelevant, though, to your second point of your question, which is how do we address youth concerns, which is hugely relevant and which we got to do, frankly, regardless of the degree to which they are voting, because it's just important. Number one to me is climate action and clean energy. I just held a conference on this a couple of days ago at the Olin College of Engineering. We had a huge student presence there, and we were talking about state level policy and industrial development. We were talking about clean energy, technology, and science, and we were talking about international affairs, because we've got to tie these three initiatives together to get to 1.7 by 2050. And we need to make it a North Star for the Democratic Party, because the Republican Party is not going to join us in legislating for the clean energy future. We saw that with the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the biggest, boldest climate action in history, investment in clean energy in history. Not a single Republican vote for it. I think that's going to hurt them with young voters for years to come. That's a bad vote for the future. And the other one that I know is incredibly salient, and that my new colleague Maxwell Frost has run on, is gun safety legislation. I was a former Marine officer. I slept 8, trained patrol with an AR-15 for 4.5 years. No civilian needs to own an assault weapon. It's just completely unreasonable. And the majority of American opinion is with us. The supermajority of youth opinion is with us. We have got to pass common sense gun safety legislation around safe storage, around assault weapons, around magazine capacity, around background checks. These save lives, and they are going to energize the youth base.
Can I piggyback on that? Oh, Grace?
No, you go ahead, Daniel. Go ahead.
Look, before recently President Obama has been, sounding the alarm on democracy, but one thing he grumbles about and says he worries about in recent years is when he talks to his kids' friends and they talk about like voting doesn't do anything or sort of apathy toward voting. And maybe this is just sort of an older person grumbling about the youth, but I do get that sense among the youngins these days that there is an apathy or sort of like, yeah, you stuck it to the man. Both parties are terrible or something like that. Do you see that? Does that come up? Do you know what Obama is talking about? Does that worry you at all? Could you, I mean, is
Yeah,
there
let me
any...
widen the lens on that question. I think
Okay.
Specific point about youth voting, I haven't seen data that suggests that youth voting is on a decline. I've seen the opposite, that it's actually slightly on the incline. So I'm not sure we're seeing the numbers to support that there is greater apathy for voting. I do support lowering the voting age to 16 because I think voting is a habit. The best predictor of whether you're going to vote is whether you have voted. And having people vote for the first time when they're at their home with their parents rather than when they're potentially in college or elsewhere, I do think it's helpful because they've got more placidness. But let me expand what I think the president is getting at, which I strongly agree with, which is a sense of cynicism about a lot of challenges that we face. As the president said, don't boo, vote. Cynicism is easy. Cynicism is cheap. Cynicism doesn't help anything. I am deeply optimistic. I work in Congress, but I am deeply excited and optimistic about what this country can do and about coming to work every day, because that is the only attitude I think that can beget progress. And I worry when young people revert immediately to a cynical, jaded view of the world, because one, that closes their avenues for exploration and curiosity, which is such an important part of development, but it also just doesn't actually help get to solutions. Like literally, how are we going to solve this problem then? If you're not engaging in the debate, you're not solving the problem.
So as you mentioned, you work in Congress, which is not exactly the most friendly place to work at times. Indeed, I've covered Congress for 3 years. And the first thing that I covered in Congress was the first impeachment of Donald Trump. And I thought, wow, this is it. This is the nadir. Relationships between members could not get worse than this. And then obviously I was extremely wrong. And now we're seeing that you've had more election deniers elected in this election. As of right now, we still have the metal detectors around the entryway into the House chamber. Are you concerned at all about relationships between Republicans and Democrats, particularly with such a narrow majority, whatever it may be? And secondarily, are you worried at all about working side by side with election deniers?
After January 6th, I was one of the first Democrats to announce I was not going to be co-leading or co-sponsoring legislation with election deniers. I just didn't think I could represent my district's values and do that. Now that these election deniers voters have sent them back to Congress, I'm going to have to re-examine, to what degree I'm able to collaborate with them, because if their voters are sending them back here, do I have an obligation then to work with them in good faith? I got to do some digging in on that and talk with my staff and frankly get the temperature of my district on that, which is the people to whom I'm most responsible. But in a broader sense, like, does Congress work better if relationships are better? Yeah, of course. I don't have a baseline for pre-January 6th. That was my 3rd day in office, I think. I got to imagine it was not really accretive in terms of relationship building. And so it would be helpful for us to forge better one-on-one bonds. I will say, I try to be pretty active on the House floor. We've got these long vote series, and I really try to be pretty active in getting across the aisle and talking to people. My general sense is like there's 435 members of Congress, and 400 of them you could go out to dinner with your spouse, their spouse, and have a reasonable conversation about 80% of things. 35, really are problematic. But that is enough to potentially work with, right? Like we have human beings here who I think largely are here for the right reasons. I just think their primary system and Donald Trump has, as you put it, just locked that party in a fever.
This does actually remind me of a certain hobby horse of mine. So I cover Congress pretty regularly. I'm at the Capitol a lot. And for those long vote series that you mentioned, it'll come on that you have 15 minutes for this vote, and then it takes 45 minutes for one vote. And it drives me insane and drives all reporters insane as we are waiting outside of the chamber. So how will you, as a member of Congress, address this deeply important issue for reporters to, hustle along on those votes?
I agree with you. It drives us crazy on the House floor too. I think it's a good question to raise with the next floor leader, whoever that is, because we do need to bring the gavel down on these votes faster.
Yeah, you guys are as bad as the Senate, and that's really saying something, because they take forever.
Doesn't the Senate get to like cycle through their votes over the course of the day? They have it sort of more.
Yeah, it's more spaced out, but they still will take an hour and a half or two votes, and it drives me insane. And you all do a very similar thing.
Just know, if it's any solace, just know that it drives us crazy too.
That does make me feel a bit better.
We are running out of time here. Do you have any closing questions to ask, Grace? I have one lightning round question. I always like to ask folks that I get to do these long kind of interviews with, the sort of softball section. I'm always interested to know what folks are reading. So what's at the top of your reading list right now?
Boy, I try to get through The Economist on a weekly basis.
Nerd.
For sure. I oftentimes fall short of that ambition, but I do try to get through it because it's a helpful grounding in the facts of the day. For my sort of recreational reading, I actually steer clear of politics entirely. I just finished a book of historical fiction about Irish monks, actually. So I really try to get my head out of Washington, D.C. and politics.
Here's my lightning round question. I asked your colleague a few years ago, Seth Moulton, this: why are the Marines the best branch of the armed services? I'll tell you what Moulton said after you tell me. Your thoughts.
We live our core values, honor, courage, and commitment. They're not a bumper sticker. They are imbued into you on day one of officer candidate school, and you are selected against it. People that don't meet those standards are not advanced to the next level of training. And so when you actually are seeing Marine officers and Marines out in the field, these people live those values. Strong junior officer and non-commissioned officer training in terms of, it's called mission type orders, basically the ability to take an end state and improvise, adapt, and overcome to meet it despite the fog of war. That's a strong asset. The training is the toughest, and the esprit de corps is the highest of any branch. And we have a singular focus on our two most important objectives as a branch of service. One is making Marines, and the second is winning wars.
Yeah, Congressman Moulton basically said that. It took him a minute. He was like, I'm surprised. I've never gotten this question before. And he paused and he said, in other branches, you're promised all these skills. We're here to fight. We're here to win wars, essentially. So
that's right. We kick down doors.
Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.
That is all I've got. Grace?
Yeah, I don't think I have any more right now, although if I see you in the halls and something else comes to me, I will definitely be sure to ask. But thank you so much for being with us, Congressman. This was a really fun conversation.
Yeah, I think you made some news today, Congressman. This is great.
Daniel, Grace, thank you for having me on. It was fun to talk.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Right, thanks, everyone, for joining us at the run-up today. We will be around soon. We have some exciting guests coming. So.
Yes. All right.